Ready? Hi! Today I will be talking about my writing life. Many people were wondering, how does one become one? Oh, and this is an English video. I will have Korean subs. I think I haven't made up my mind, but I think I'll be alternating between English and Korean, and I think more Korean videos, and the other language will be inserted in subtitles. I have talked about my writing life here and there through some interviews, but I think this will be like the first video that I'll be making on the topic. So, how did I get into travel writing? First of all, I've always loved traveling. First time that I traveled as an adult was freshman year, and it was during my training day. And back then, I don't want to go all like, back in the day, but back in the day, the identity of trainees was very secretive. Shh. So my company was just not really happy with me traveling domestically, and I didn't feel comfortable traveling domestically, so I went abroad. My first destination was Central Europe. It was Czech Republic, Hungary, and Austria. I fell in love with all these places. I fell in love with Europe, and yeah, it was a love at first sight. And ever since then, I've always had part-time jobs because I supported myself since I was in college. So I would save up and take as many trips as I could. So I always knew that traveling was my thing. And even before that, I loved reading. I've been a bookworm since forever. I'm an avid reader, I'm an obsessive reader, I don't discriminate, I will read anything and everything. But it never occurred to me that I would become a writer. I just loved reading books. And while I was preparing a trip before graduating, so I was in my senior year, and I always had a thing for coffee. But I don't know any technical stuff, I just really love drinking coffee. I'm addicted to coffee. And you know how everybody says Italy is the place to go if you want good coffee. So I wanted to check out Italy and go to all these and wanted to visit all the great Italian cafes. Yeah, so that was going to be the treat for myself, like a graduation gift. I went to the bookstore because that's where I start my researches, and I was looking for books on Italy and coffee. But they didn't really have any books for Italian cafe. They had books for traveling Italy, and they had books for how to become a barista. So I really couldn't find anything that I wanted. It just suddenly out of nowhere occurred to me that maybe I should write this book. This was like when I was preparing my album. Things were not so good. It was a rocky phase. I wasn't looking for a backup career. Back then it was still, singing was the way to go. But yeah, maybe why not write a book? So I started to pitch this idea to publishers, actually one publisher. I did my market research, I looked around the bookstore, picked out a few books that I thought I would buy as a consumer, looked into the layout and the editing, and just went for a publisher. I went to their official website. They have a small tab for submissions for book ideas, and I laid out the background situation, how I'm preparing this trip, and I couldn't really get my hands on any of the books that I was looking for, so I wanted to write one. There's no competition yet. I think it will sell well because this number of people go to Italy each year. It's a growing market. This many people drink coffee each year. It's a solid market in Korea, so I just proposed with what I think was a good pitch. And luckily, the first publisher that I pitched the idea to gave me a call back. So while I was pitching, I'm doubting whether the publishers would read every single book idea submissions. But many years into my career, I actually asked this question, and every single person who works for a publisher, they said that they read every single application that they get. Go for it if you have a great idea. And this is my first book. It actually has a different title because when we were reprinting, it says Cafe Italia, but when we were reprinting for the second or the third time, we changed the title to Italian Cafe Trip. Just easier. It's just an essay of my trips in the 5 big cities, visiting well-known cafes, drinking local menu, interacting with cafe people. It took me about a little over a month. I did a lot of research before going. I'm not really the person who interacts a lot with the locals. I like keeping to myself, but intentionally I chat up a lot of people. Well, they chat me up because they're friendly people. I talked to a lot of people that I met along the way, asking questions, getting information that only locals could give you. And I drank about like, I don't know, 25 cups a day. I don't think I got any sleep during the month that I was in Italy. The amount of caffeine, because I included like, I don't know, 10 to 15 cafes per city. I think half of the place that I went to didn't make it in the book because they weren't good enough or just, wasn't really fitting into the story. So yeah, I'd be drinking. And if it was a good cafe, if they have several signature menus, I would try all of them. By like 7, 8 p.m. my hand shaking. I would lie on my bed at 2 a.m. and not go to sleep, just like really, really wide awake. But yeah, it was really fun. And I was very lucky with my first book because when I pitched the idea and they gave me a call back and we had a meeting, I told them that I'm a senior in college. I don't have any money for this trip because it's gonna be a month-long trip. I'll be visiting a lot of cafes, and I just told them that if I don't get a really big advance on this book, I don't think I can make it. And they gave me a big advance. It was actually, I've published 22 books, 23 to 22, I think, okay, 20 something books, and that's the biggest advance I got. So I was very lucky. I later found out that they never do that. I was lucky because that was like the heyday of personal essays, and a lot of publishers were investing a lot into personal essays because they were selling well. As a whole, as a batch, it was a solid block of the publication market. Now it isn't, not at all. These days, guidebooks are going up, essays down. But yeah, so I'd gotten enough advance. I'll be talking more about the advance and how travel writers make money later on. But yeah, so that's how my first book got made. And after my book came out, there was like a year of me going through a lot of difficult situation with my singing career. And then, after going through that for a year, I also wanted a month-long break. And this was also lucky on my part because normally trainees don't really get to demand a month-long vacation. But because the company was at fault for my debut album being delayed, I could pretty much demand anything. So I'm like, you know what? You fix these problems. I'm taking off to Europe for a month. That's what I did. So yeah, so they let me take a vacation. So the second book, I don't have all my books with me, but it's an image here somewhere. My second trip was to Europe, and I was visiting all the European Christmas markets. So the topic of my second book was also an essay. It was Christmas in Europe because Korea doesn't celebrate Christmas that big, and it's my favorite holiday. I start decorating my room since November, and even that is like a restraint on my part. So yeah, after a fantastic month celebrating Christmas for like 30 days, I pitched the idea to my first publisher and they passed. But the editor that I had worked with for my first book, she had moved to another, she introduced me to another publisher, I think, and they actually wanted to do the book. And I heard, because the second book was quite unique, the first publisher thought it was like a niche market and not many people would be interested. But the second book was actually well received. And I heard that the first company execs were mad for the editors passing on my second book. But yeah, so the second book was out, and after the two books they weren't like best sellers, but they were okay, and that led to a lot of opportunities because since then it was the publishers who were making pitches at me, and that's how it actually really took off. From the third book on, I would have better deals when it comes to royalties. So that's it, and my way is probably the standard way, just pitching your idea to the publisher through their official website, and then as you make your network of editors and publications, you can submit your next idea with less difficulty. I don't know if it's the same with every other country. I don't know. It's definitely the case for Korea. So as I've said, as far as Korean editors are concerned, they do read every single pitch. So if you have a good idea, pitch it. And the second most popular way, I think, is going through an academy. These days, there's a lot of writing academies, travel writing academies, to be specific, and many of them ends with connecting the students with publishers. I know a lot of fellow travel writers who actually got their start this way. They went to academy, and because you are studying with other people, you have your whole class as networks. And you know, when you get like a request to do a guidebook on certain city, you have someone to pass it on to if it's not meant for you. That's also good. And third is you start out as a journalist at travel magazine. If you want to get into travel writing because you love traveling, this may not be your number one choice because you don't really travel as often as you think. Again, I'm just referring to the Korean market. Many cases you get summary of the things a certain tour company or a city's tourism office wants you to promote. You get the photos from them, and then you just put it into nice words, edit it nicely, and then put it out. And there are certain tours, these are called family tours. We call them fam tour. Usually the tourism offices, they would organize journalists from this newspaper or this magazine and send them off with a tourist office person for like a 5-day trip, hitting all the places that they want to promote. So those trips you get to go to, but it won't be like a month-long trip for your essay. But if you get your career started that way, many people, after forming a lot of good network with the tourist offices and other journalists and other writers, they start out with their own book. So those are the 3 ways that people usually get their start as a travel writer in Korea. Compared to when I was starting out, many more people are working as travel writers. There are an increasing number of platforms that will help you. And you know how magazines are always just welcoming ideas and travel photo competitions, articles, you know, guest writing. There is a platform if you look for it. So I think if you are interested or you want to see how good you are, I say just pitch your ideas and pitch your photos and writing to all these places. Build a portfolio. So that wraps up how I became a travel writer. Oh, I think it wasn't until like my 10th book that I really regarded this as my main job. My name card says travel writer, but it started out as a side job. So I never really took it seriously until I realized that it was my main job and I was okay with it being my main job. I was the unluckiest person ever in the K-pop industry, but when it comes to my writing, I was very lucky and I'm so thankful. It hasn't always been like 100% success and happiness here, but my case definitely is a lucky one. And God closes the door, window. And now, how one makes a living as a travel writer. Okay, this is the sad part. It's really similar to music. For book sales, you get royalties. So first there's an advance, but this is like a prepaid royalty. Unless you're a really famous author, standard contract is that you get your advances out of the royalties that you'll be getting when the book publishes. And just like the music industry, distributors get most income. I think they take up like half or more. So the bookstores, the big bookstore chains, they're making most of the money. Then it's the publishers and then it's the authors. Yeah. Unless it's like a national bestseller, it's really hard to make your living solely based on royalties. Luckily, because I have 20-something books, it's just tiny parts coming in unexpectedly, quantity over quality in this case. But since most of my books are travel books, last year, not a happy year. But there are also other things that you can make money as a travel writer. For instance, you can sell your article or photos to travel magazines. You can do lectures, cultural centers, at department stores, the Ministry of Education. They dispatched me to just talk to teachers for their cultural training program, corporations, high schools, middle schools, and the topics would vary. Some people contact me based on the books they saw. Like, we saw your book and we want you to elaborate on it. It could be informative, it could be inspirational, it could be Q&A, depending on the demand. But last year, I was booked for like a good 50 lectures, which were all cancelled. Yeah, not a single one went through because of COVID. And it's likely that we won't be making any plans for the first half of this year at least. It's good that I have a side job. Many people, many travel writers, every single travel writer that I know personally, they have other sources of income. For me, I teach English. My students are corporate executives. I have an agency that hooks me up with clients. Most times it's half-year contract or 3 months contract because they know that I have to travel. And I also work as a lyricist, but since if I had to rank, it's on number 3 of my job priorities. I beat myself up for not putting myself out there more because you gotta have meetings with the A&Rs, you gotta pitch ideas more often, you gotta just be a lot more aggressive than what I am doing. And I know that I should be reaching out more. I should. So all of these things combined makes up the income, and that's why in the travel writing business in Korea, I don't know what it's like in other countries, in Korea, many retired people become travel writers because they have the time, they have money saved up, they don't need to make a living out of this, so many retired people become travel writers. And when I was getting into the travel writing business, it was very surprising because I was 23, 24 at the time that I was pitching my first idea, and everyone was like, oh my god, you're such a baby. You're only 23 and you want to write a book? That's amazing. And again, hindsight, that's the correct response because 23 is a really young age. But after being a trainee in the K-pop industry for like 7-8 years, I had been listening to everyone telling me how old I am. I didn't get that when I was 22. Ever since I passed that mark and became 23, 24, 25, and on, the first thing everyone would say was, oh my god, but you're so old, you're still a trainee, you're gonna become a singer? But you're 25. I'd have meetings with TV producers and my company people would introduce me. She's gonna be our next artist to debut, we're preparing our album, she's 25, and they're like, oh, 25, but you're so old. So I've been getting that for too long. So when I was starting out in the publication industry, it was really unsettling and new to hear people tell me how young I was. So it's really rare for a younger person to work as a travel writer, which also gave me an edge. When it comes to travel writing, everything worked my way. I was very, very lucky. Okay, so that wraps up my story on becoming a travel writer and living as a travel writer. Future plans. Last overseas trip that I took was to New York. And I'm so glad that I took that trip in January because like 3 days after I came back to Korea, pandemic. So my publisher and I talked about my second trip to New York to be determined depending on how the vaccination would take place. I really want to go back there this fall. If everything goes well, hopefully I will resume my trip to New York in October. I don't know. And so that's one of the books that I have already signed a contract for and will need to finish. And another one that I signed and I didn't even get to go on my first trip is Bali. I have signed a contract for a Bali essay. If things go really well, I might visit Bali before New York. I cannot cross my fingers harder. Before the pandemic, I was in talks with other publishers for a book on Malta. I love this place. I love this place. And the whole of France suspended. Also, I also do a lot of follow-ups on the books that I've already published because, you know, information changes. So many places to go, a lot of pending deals, a lot of signed deals that needs to be worked on, and that's how it is. Okay, so if you have any questions on writing, please leave your comments. If there's a lot of questions, I will do a follow-up. Yeah, and thank you for watching.